If you've been on the internet recently, you've probably heard of introverts and extroverts, and you may even be able to think of some stereotypes to go along with them. Today, we're going to take a closer look at introverts and extroverts, their stereotypes, and the psychological realities behind them. Your stereotypical introvert is shy. They don't want to go out and they hate parties. Their hobbies include reading, drinking warm beverages, especially tea, and petting animals. Above all, they love to stay home if at all possible. Don't try calling your introvert friend unexpected because they're probably not going to answer. Your stereotypical extrovert loves talking to people. They're the life of the party and they're always at a party. They can't go very long without talking to someone at least. They often give off major giant puppy vibes. They've never met a stranger. Their hobbies include parties, hanging out, and generally anything involving people. Society has probably told you the myth that an introvert or an extrovert can switch to become more like the opposite personality. This isn't exactly accurate. For a short time, an introvert can rally their strength and go out talking to people or entertain if needed, but that's never going to be their favorite thing like it could be for an extroverted person. An extrovert can get tired of being around people and want some time to be by themselves, or they can be quiet. They'll just bounce back faster than their introvert friend would and want to be around people again. It's easy to consider introversion and extroversion personality traits, things that can change over time, but it's not correct. These are based on the way that your brain processes information, unlike shyness, which is based on not talking to people because you're timid or afraid to talk to people. It's entirely possible to be a shy extrovert. They're not a mutually exclusive thing. Introversion and extroversion are based on how you feel after you have interacted with people. An extrovert is energized by interaction. An introvert is drained. Introverts tend to think quietly, where an extrovert would tend to think verbally or out loud. Because introverts are drained by interaction, they will evaluate the value of an interaction before walking up to have a conversation. An extrovert is far more likely to just jump right in with less prior consideration of the value that an interaction is going to have before they begin to speak. You may have heard that extroverts don't do well when left alone for too long. This can be true for everyone, but is not necessarily more true for extroverts. Extroverts need more stimulation than introverts, but that stimulation can be from physical activity or their environment, not just from people. Russell G. Green's preferred stimulation levels in introverts and extroverts, effects on arousal and performance, stated that introverts will choose a much lower stimulation level than extroverts. Introverts are better at focusing at lower levels of stimulation than their extrovert counterpoints. At a certain point of stimulation, an introvert starts to get worse at focusing. In comparison, extroverts were better at focusing at higher stimulation levels than their introverted counterparts. And an extrovert would continue to get better at focusing with increased stimulation levels. Though, as you can see from the visual on the slide, it was theorized in the study that an extrovert too would reach a stimulation level that was just too high for them to focus at and would see the same decrease that an introvert does at a much lower level of stimulation. So now that we've talked about some of the stereotypes about introverts and extroverts and some of the myths surrounding them, let's talk about the evidence-based description of an introvert and an extrovert. The introvert requires less stimulation from their environment to focus, processes things internally, and has a vibrant internal world that they give a lot of their attention to not necessarily the external world happening around them. An extrovert does better in a more stimulating environment. They like to think out loud and process things under the context of what's happening externally. They live planted firmly in reality in the here and now. That sounds a little bit different from the stereotype that we talked about at the beginning, doesn't it? We do need to talk about one last myth. Introverts and extroverts. They don't actually exist. In the article, Introverts and Extroverts, the journal Psychological Review related introversion and extroversion to a scale. At one end, you have introverts, and at the other, extroverts. Yet to be wholly one or the other is to be clinically insane. To be completely incapable of thinking internally or externally is not to be a functional human being. Instead, people lean to one side of the scale or the other, with some tendencies of the other side being apparent. We are all some form of ambivert, with the ability to do things that are considered to be part of the other type. So, you've spent all of this time learning about introversion and extroversion, only to learn that you're not one or the other, and so it doesn't matter. Well, that's not entirely correct. True, you're not 100% either introverted or extroverted, but you do lean one way or another, and it's possible to use this to your advantage. Let's talk about it in terms of your study habits. If you're an extroverted person trying to go somewhere quiet without much going on is probably not going to be where your most effective studying is going to happen. On the other hand, if you lean towards introversion, it may be even more crucial for you to make sure that your environment is less busy. If you just spent an hour studying and now you can't remember a word of what you've read or heard, it might be time to take a look at your studying environment and change it to the way that you lean. So now that you've learned a little bit more about introverts and extroverts, their stereotypes, the reality, and just a tiny bit about what you can do with that information, I hope that you're better able to understand yourself and others going forward. Thank you.